Thank you. Okay, just so you know, we're on record, so anything you say is recorded, and Nikki and our team at Chichester and Portsmouth Community Training will make this public for the benefit of other instructors later. So
perfect.
Just keep that mindful for everyone. Okay, so the plan was for no breaks. So if you need to exit the room for a minute, just stick yourself on mute and go and deal with whatever you have to deal with, please. Timings wise, as my email hinted, I haven't really got a clue how long this is going to take. It's going to take more than an hour, less than 2 hours is my prediction. This afternoon's group, of course, will get a much clearer direction from me because I'll have the benefit of delivering it this morning. If you've got a mobile phone, if you could please just turn it off so we don't get any interference. If you want to take notes, please do. But as you've already heard, you'll get access to this as a video later. And finally, if you've got a question, there's no need to email it or message it, just unmute yourself and interrupt. So we'll take questions as we go along. If it's something I'm coming to, I'll park it, I'll shelve it and politely say we're coming back to that shortly. But no need to hang on to the end for questions. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to start off really with just a quick look of where search patterns fit within the RWA scheme. So you're all RWA instructors and you probably know this already, but let's just remind ourselves whereabouts should we or would we be teaching search patterns to students. We're then going to discuss datums and leg length or search pattern leg length. And we're going to have a look at our first search, which is the sector search. And this is one I suggest some of you will be teaching. We're then going to have a look at what's known as the expanding square, or some people call it expanding box. Basically the same thing, if you ignore politics. We'll have a look at how that works. So that's very theoretical, delivered by me. Then we'll have a quick chat about how you might deliver those two things practically. And some of you, I'm quite sure, have done already. And some of you may have been a student on a course at some point. So we'll talk about how we're going to deliver that stuff. And then we're going to have a look at area searches. I suspect the vast majority of you won't be teaching area searches. And as the talk progresses, it'll become obvious why. But we'll have a briefer look at those because that's more for your knowledge. So you've got a bit of knowledge in the bank in case you get quizzed with questions. But I don't think you're going to be teaching them unless you work specifically with search and rescue, RLI, etc., etc. Then we have a quick quiz because by then you'll have listened to me for so long you'll have enough of my talking. So a quick friendly quiz, no assessment. And then if we've got time, I've got a Man Overboard video which we can have a little discussion. It's a real video of a real incident, and it's not to tear apart the people who produced the video because it's quite honest of them to have made it available. But it's an interesting discussion point for instructors. So let's crack on then. So that's the plan. So let's crack on. So question to you guys: which RWA courses, which syllabus or syllabi contain search patterns?
Safety boat.
Safety boat.
Advanced. Advanced power.
Yeah. Any more?
A yacht master.
Whereabouts does it say in Yachtmaster?
It's me, Paul.
Sorry, say again.
It's Paul.
Paul. Whereabouts? Which publication does it say search patterns for Yachtmaster? I'm not saying it doesn't. I just don't remember myself where that might be.
No, it's. I mean, it's a long time ago. I can just remember doing it. I'm not sure that it teaches it now or not. I'm not a yacht master instructor, but I can just remember doing it.
Let me show you the places I found, and I'm only human, so I may have missed one or two. I found it in the advanced powerboat course, which you just mentioned. I found it in the exam notes for the advanced powerboat certificate of competence. By definition, if advanced powerboat courses contain it, it's something that might come up in an advanced powerboat instructor course, isn't it? I found it mentioned in the advanced pilotage course from we're spotting a trend here, aren't we? From the motor cruising scheme. I found it was previously mentioned in the offshore personal survival, and we'll talk about that in a second. And I have to confess, I'd completely forgotten it was in the safety boat course. So thank you to whoever said that a moment ago. Let's have a look at what it actually says. So this is a screenshot straight out of the powerboat logbook. And here we are. search patterns. It gives us a bit of direction. It says understands, and you're probably all familiar with these terms. We have knowledge of, we have understands, and we have can. Understands means a student needs to be able to explain to you and prove to you that they understand, that they could go away and do it. They don't necessarily have to have shown you it. And if we look at that section in general, what else is in there? So we've got helicopter rescue procedures. I think we all accept that most students aren't going to demonstrate that to us, are they, on a course? Towing and being towed, it would be quite nice if they did get a chance to demonstrate it. So I would suggest that this information here tells me I need to cover it as theory to a reasonable level, and it would be good if they can have a go at it, but it doesn't actually lay down in stone that they must have a go at it. Where else does it come into? So 3 pages further on in the advanced, in the Powerboat logbook and syllabus, I'm now in the advanced exam, and there's the word there, sector search. And in here it says, in particular, candidates must know the responsibility of a skipper in relation to. So there's a slight difference there. In the advanced course, it says search patterns, so it doesn't specify which search. In the advanced COC, it specifically names a search. So it would seem to me only fair to our students that at this level we're teaching them a sector search, because they may be examined on it when they move on a few days or a few weeks later. This is a screenshot from the motor cruising handbook, the logbook G158. And it says, I've got all your thumbnails over my screen, and it says knowledge of how a vessel may be asked. So it's a little bit less than we see in the Powerboat scheme. This is a screenshot from the offshore special regulations, which is where we get the syllabus for the offshore personal survival technique. And it used to, in this section, it used to state search patterns. It doesn't anymore. It now just says career overboard prevention and recovery. And it tells me I've got 30 minutes to teach that. Now, in my world, we do a few minutes on lifelines, tethers, and we do maybe 10, 15 minutes on physically how to lift a person on board. This is his theory, and that gives me another 15 minutes to kill. So I find search patterns slots into there quite nicely. The reason search patterns is no longer stated in that syllabus is offshore racers are required to carry one of these devices. So theoretically, if everyone's wearing a personal AIS, we're far less likely to get involved with search pattern. And as someone correctly said, it also appears in a safety course. My apologies, I didn't get a screenshot for that. So, sorry.
Can I just ask? I'm interested in the Powerboat Advanced scheme. How many advanced instructors that are here that do, as a rule, teach a practical box search or similar? I'm just curious, because it's an understands, but I tend to always teach it practically, and I wonder whether that's a me over the top or a recurring theme.
Well, Gary, that's a question I was going to ask you lot shortly, so thank you. Let's have a quick me from anyone that does. Me. Okay, good. So there's at least 2 of us. There may be some more by the end of this talk. We'll see. So speaking officially, the source data for search patterns is this thing here. It's called IAMSAR. It's not a document a lot of you will necessarily come across. IAMSAR is a collaboration between the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and the Civil Aviation equivalent. So it's two global bodies get together to discuss how search and rescue is going to happen in the aeronautical and maritime region. When it comes to search and rescue, they produce 3 manuals. The picture on here is volume 3, which is the one that specifically deals with search patterns. And if I was managing search and rescue on a national scale, this would be the publication that I would derive. So if I was working for HM Coast Guard, this would be the publication I would derive my procedures from. It's not a publication I'd expect our instructors to consult, because for most of us, we're not teaching people that are part of a coordinated effort. So let's just think who we are teaching. Most of you, I'd suggest, are going to be teaching power boaters, but a minority of you may be working with search and rescue professionals. And when I say search and rescue professionals, I'm talking about lifeboat crews, etc. They may be unpaid, but I consider them professional. So with these guys, when they attend a search, have got very good communications with the Coast Guard. They've got very extensive training, and they're probably one asset on a scene of a bigger scale. Why I'd suggest these guys might be your students, George and Mildred, have lost someone overboard, and they're not that hooked up with the whole national network and so on, and they want a chance at finding their family member that they've lost. So I think we need to be clear that I'm focused on teaching George and Mildred a system that will work for them, accepting that some of my George and Mildreds may move on to something where they'll get a high level of training in their own job. So that's not that I'm going to contradict what the Coast Guard would do. We just don't have access to the software and so on that they might be using. So we're going to start with datum searches. If you're not sure what datum searches, that will become apparent in the next 20 minutes. And the first one we're going to talk about, the first thing we're going to talk about is the datum itself. So what is it? What is a datum? There's a question for you guys.
Where the incident commenced.
Yeah, it's a reference point. We need a start point, if you like, for our search. And this is going to be on my picture I'm going to draw in a second. This is going to be my start point. What might that datum be? Where might it have come from?
Information that the other crew members can give us, the skipper of the boat. That's where the starting point, where it all happened.
Correct. So how might we know? Because I mean, it's just imagine we're in open water. It's quite vague. He's back there somewhere. How might we know where that start point is?
Right and wrong.
We could throw a buoy out or something.
Good. Okay, so there's our two options. So on the left, we've got the crew of board the boat have hit the man overboard function, and it's recorded on a plotter or recorded as a lat and long where the person went overboard. On the right, the crew on board the boat have chucked some man overboard gear overboard. So these are our two sorts of datums. I'm going to talk about and teach them very briefly. So the lat and long, I'm going to call it a digital datum because I think we're all working in a digital world these days. So the chap's fallen overboard and they've hit the man overboard functions. That tells me man overboard functions going on. This is a Ray Marine screenshot, by the way. There's the lat and long to where he is, so I could pass that on to another asset, couldn't I? There's my range and bearing to get back to him. There's interestingly the time the chap's been in the water, or the time since we hit the button. This is quite useful because it's very pictorial. If I lose my bearing as to where I am in all the kerfuffle, my chart plotter tells me I can see it. Right, great, you're pointing at him. Tells me how to get back to him. What is the downside of the digital datum here that we're using?
Doesn't take account of the tide.
Spot on. So as time progresses, let's imagine throughout this session that the tide is going from west to east. Okay, so the tide's going this direction, the arrow's going. As time progresses, my man's moving off down here, isn't it? So digital datum is very accurate in the early stages. As time progresses, it loses accuracy. Now, I would suggest, as a bunch of advanced powerboat, yachtmaster instructors, etc., you would have the basic knowledge and skills to update that. So if you knew he was there an hour ago and knew the tide was going east for an hour, you could do a pretty basic EP and essentially work yourself a new datum. So that's the first thing to mention, is a digital datum would need to be updated if it was going to maintain accuracy. We've got here a very short video of, just for those that haven't used the man overboard function, but I suspect most of you have. Here's one in progress. So they're sailing along quite happily, minding their own business. Joe falls overboard. Someone hits the MOV function. Let me just press pause for a second. So there's your man overboard. We can all see that that's roughly southeast, can't we? But there's the bearing back to him. There's the distance, we've only gone 17 meters. There's the time. He's been in the water 5 seconds so far, or let me correct that, it's 5 seconds since we hit the button. This particular plotter shows you the tide vector, so I know straight away which way it's going. And the black line, I think, is the heading, and the blue line is our course over the ground. So let's just run that for a moment. So the crew are starting to react, the boat's starting to change heading. I suspect you've all seen this in training. Let's just advance a little bit, forward a bit more. He's now coming back, isn't he? We'll just pause it there. We won't watch the rest of it, but you get the idea. A very easy for a helm to follow way of getting back. So a digital datum, as I call it, that's Doug's name, that's not the usual name, is derived from the chart plotter or GPS. The other datum you guys mentioned just now was the visual datum, which is the man overboard gear. So we've got 5 bits of equipment attached there. I'm not really too concerned with the whistle number 2, but I'd just like to talk about the other 4 bits very quickly. So first of all, what's this thing here?
Damn boy.
Damn boy. And what's this bit on the top?
Oscar.
Board flag.
It is Oscar, isn't it? Man overboard. Some damn boys are a bit cheaper and have all yellow, all red, but it should ideally be the right flag. And this thing here is known as
Horseshoe boy.
Horseshoe boy.
Now, what is the purpose of the damn boy as opposed to the purpose of the horseshoe?
You can see it from a distance off.
So those of you operating on coded sailboats have to carry this gear. If you operate on a coded motorboat, you're not required to carry the damn boy. It's that bit there you're required to have. So 3, 4, and 5. And the reason for that is the feeling is that sailors may sail away for a longer distance while they get engines on, get sails down, get spinnakers down, and therefore they need this thing. I mean, an ocean-going damn boy's got 4 meters of height above water level. An inshore one might only be a meter. The motorboaters among you may well carry a damn boy, but it's not statutory. It's an optional extra. The horseshoe, of course, is bright yellow and visible. And what does the horseshoe resemble? What other piece of safety kit looks a bit like a horseshoe?
Sweet boy.
Yeah, any more options?
Rescue slings.
Yeah, helicopter strop.
Yeah. What do you all wear every day that looks a bit like that kind of shape and proportion?
Life jacket.
Spot on. So, of course, when we wear our life jackets folded up, it looks nothing like that. But as you all know, once your life jacket's inflated, it is similar size and proportions to the horseshoe. And that's something we're going to use to make our life easier in a second. Because I would suggest if I can see a horseshoe at 100 meters, I'm going to spot a man in a life jacket at about 100 meters. If I lose sight of the horseshoe at 150 meters, I'm going to lose sight of the man in the life jacket at about 150 meters. I know it's not precise because the back of a life jacket is not so visible, but it's similar proportions and it's a tool we can use. We've got the light. We don't need to talk about that. We all understand what the light's for. And finally, we've got this thing on the end, which is
Drogue.
Drogue.
and what's the purpose of the drogue?
Slow it down in the wind.
So the thing's not blowing across the surface rapidly. So just to sort of summarize then, the big difference between the digital datum and the visual datum is the digital datum is going out of date with time, isn't it? Because the casualty is moving with tide, but the datum's not. The visual datum is hopefully moving at a similar rate to the casualty. So if you manage to chuck this gear overboard within 10 seconds of someone falling overboard, and let's say they're 50 meters away, if you can get back to this, then hopefully the casualty is still 50 meters away. I should add to that, my own opinion is that the standard drogues you buy are not actually big enough to completely eliminate the drift by wind. But we appreciate the two are slightly different. So I said I was going to talk about sector search, so let's get started. So if you're aware of a slightly different version of sector search, don't worry, I'm coming to your version and I'll explain why I favour this one and so on and so forth. So we've got a datum, we've got a start point. This is my best guess of where the man is. So I've either gone back to that visual datum or I've gone to a digital datum, and if my digital datum is out of date, I've corrected my EP to the new spot. And if you've used the digital datum, you're going to throw your own horseshoe in here because we want a visual reference of someone we can come back to. Depending which publication you read, some people suggest that the first leg of a sector search should go into the wind. And they suggest that because it's easier to drive straight into the wind than across it. I don't buy that argument because you're going to go in all different directions anyway. Some people suggest your first leg should go down tide. I also don't buy that argument because this is my best guess of where my man is. If I think my man is down tide of here, then I should move my datum to there and that should be my search starts. So because we're going to our best guess, there isn't any favoured direction other than keep your arithmetic simple, and to keep your arithmetic simple, we go north. So how's this going to work? Well, I'm going to get David to sit in the back of the boat, and David's going to be looking backwards, and he's going to be looking at my visual datum at my horseshoe, and I've got Peter on the port side of the boat looking in this quadrant out here as we go forward. I've got Simon in the starboard side of the boat looking in the out this side. I've got myself driving, and I've got David looking backwards. So what David's going to be doing, this is a real man overboard here, so that's a real person there. But I'd like you for the moment just to pretend it is a horseshoe in the water. So David, here he is, got a little bit younger, is watching the horseshoe. And David is gauging how well he can see it. And he's counting in seconds. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, etc. Or using a stopwatch, whatever. He's looking back, watching the horseshoe. And at the point that he determines he can see that horseshoe half the time, we have our detection range. So we're not going to worry about when we can see it only a quarter of the time. If we can see the horseshoe, which resembles our man, half the time, we're going to regard that as our detection range. So here we go. So we've gone north. We've established this phrase called EDR, which you won't find in textbooks anymore, and you'll see why I'm going to refer to it shortly. He's established what EDR is, the range that we can see a casualty. So we're here. We've gone. Give me a number, David. Number between 1 and 30.
Sorry, Doug, you took it to me.
Yes, give me a number between 1 and 30.
15.
15. So nice, easy math. So we've gone north for 15 seconds. David shouted, "That's me, found my EDR," and I'm going to treble that. So we go for 45 seconds. We then make a turn to starboard, goes 120 degrees, and we make another turn to, so this is so just to clarify, we've gone 15, David's counted an additional 30, helm's turned to 120, we've then counted 45, we're then going to move on to 240. And somewhere coming down this leg, because it's nice and perfect here on the PowerPoint, isn't it? But somewhere coming down that leg, we'll discover we've got a bit of error. It might be coming down here. At the point we see the horseshoe, we just correct back onto it. And this is a fundamental key point of the sector search, is that every 3 legs, you come back through your datum, so you're correcting errors. So we then carry on along the same format, 240 north, 120, 120, 240 north. So every leg was at 45 seconds, which was the number we got from here. And after we've done one complete circuit of the sector search, we have looked in this area quite heavily. And of course, this is the highest likelihood of our casualties, isn't it? Because this was our best guess. So it's most likely he's here. We've also looked in some other areas. So if you imagine, let's do the sweep here. So we're looking around here, aren't we, as we're going up? All this area has been seen. And then we turn to starboard, and all this area has been seen, all this area has been seen, etc., etc. So we've done one complete pattern, and we haven't found our casualty. And we can all see that there's some empty spots, isn't there? It's possibly he was bang in the middle of here and we didn't quite catch him. It's possibly he's in this area. It's possibly he's outside of my search pattern. So the next step is just to offset the whole search by 30 degrees. So instead of headings of north 120, 150, 240, I'm going to go 30 degrees up that way, 150 down here. I have to apologise, my west is a little bit, imagine it's a whiteboard, you're more forgiving, but that's the 270. So there's my second circuit of the same kind of geometry. So let's have a look. So we've done 2 complete circuits, and you can now see this area has really been searched very heavily, hasn't it? And in fact, a lot of these areas have now been searched 3 or 4 times, because, you know, as we went up here, or let's imagine your man's here. As we went up here, this chap looking on starboard might have seen him. This chap looking on starboard. Coming down here, this chap looking on starboard. You know, multiple chances we've seen him. If we get to this point and we've not found the man, we're going to have to start being a little bit clever. Do we think we've been unlucky and we should offset a 3rd search pattern? And there is an argument for that. Or do we think he's outside of our search area? So I'd be asking myself, how accurate was my datum to start with? you know, was it 50 minutes old when I started? Another 25 minutes has passed now. Is it possibly outside the area? Or I'm reasonably confident I'm in the right zone, and therefore I just need to offset another 30 and try again. I'm going to assume for the moment that that we think he's probably outside the area. So we're going to move on to a second sort of search, which is usually known as the expanding square, but some publications refer to it as the spanning box. It's basically the same thing. We go back to our datum. So we accept he may be in that area and we've missed him, but we think he's outside the area. And the expanding square looks to cover a larger area reasonably efficiently. And this is quite a straightforward search to follow. We've got our leg length already. I'm going to use the same EDI I've already got. So it's north, east, south, west, north, east, southwest, north, and then I run out of slide space. But essentially, that was 15, 15, 30, 30, 45, 45, 60, etc., etc. You can see how easy the maths is. Now, this search pattern is, in my opinion, much easier to perform, particularly if you don't. My apologies. I've been asked you all to turn your mobiles off. I didn't do it myself. This search pattern is much easier to perform if you don't train regularly, because northeast, southwest, northeast, southwest, there's some logic to it. Always turning to starboard, and every 2 legs add the leg length again. The downside of this search is we don't keep coming back through the datum. So on the sector search, we returned back through that datum regularly. If you remember, we went this way, and every 3rd leg we corrected any errors. So let's imagine for a moment we've got a westerly wind. So wind's coming from this side of the screen. The reality is, nice steer north by my magnetic compass. Due to leeway, I might actually do something more like that. I'm keeping a constant speed through the water, but the wind may accelerate me down here a little bit. Again, wind puts me off. Wind comes up here. So you could find even after just that first circuit, there's an error. We just have to live with that. We just accept the expanding square has some errors in it. But what it does is it covers a much larger area than the sector search fairly quickly. So hopefully those 2 searches are nothing wildly new for anyone that's done an advanced powerboat or higher, because hopefully that was covered on your course, be it as theory or practical. And I'm just going to touch on some.
Can I ask a quick question on both searches?
Yeah.
On a sailing boat, it's fairly obvious the sort of speed you're doing. If you're on a rib or a motorboat, are you slowing right down to do this, or are you keeping the speed up to try and get back to the person in the water in the shortest possible time? How does that work?
Right, so that's a good question. So let's start with the sailboat. You're going to do this at almost full speed. So it's going to be sails down. If it's rough weather, and you're going upwind, big waves coming across the deck. But if your boat will motor at 6 knots, you're doing it at 6 knots or at 7 knots, whatever you can go. On a powerboat, if we step away from the professional world, away from the search and rescue world, we're going to do it at the fastest comfortable speed. So if the conditions will allow me to drive at 20, 25 knots, then that's a fantastic speed to do it, because you can cover a lot more area than the sailing boat. There are things that would encourage you to slow down: visibility, conditions, and actually, there are some conditions you just can't drive at 25 without doing all your spines in. In a moment, we'll see a table that the RNI use where they pick a couple of speeds, and that'll give you a little bit more inkling on that. But when I teach this practically, if the conditions will allow the boat to do 20 knots, I suggest the guys do 20 knots. That's in an open rib. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, presumably the same with a motorboat.
Yeah, same deal. I mean, what you need is we described 4 crew there, didn't we? Described one guy driving, so he needs to be able to see a magnetic compass. That's fairly easy. We described a lookout on port and starboard. So they need to physically be able to see what they're doing. And there is a point when smashing through huge waves, if the crew can't see it, their area they're looking into, you're going too fast. And we've got to be mindful of not losing more crew and so on and so forth. Okay, so a little bit of terminology now.
Sorry, I've just got a follow up on that.
Yep.
Because I always teach the box search. I don't teach in practical terms, not the sector search, because it's easier for people to take in. But I always teach it at 10 knots and at 10-second intervals, because I find that's easier for people to calculate. Was there a reason that you used 15 particularly?
The reason I used 15 was that was the number David gave me. So if you remember, I was hoping David was going to be awkward and give me something like 13 or 17, but he was playing quite nice today. But that leads on to a good point. If he had given me 17, I'd have just rounded it to 15 or 20, make the maths neat. I don't know my 17 times table. So we're going to come to leg length in just a minute, Gary. So we'll just hold that thought and we'll amplify that subject in a second. So a bit of terminology for you. So I've used a term called EDR, which, as I've said, you're unlikely to find in a modern textbook. And you might think, well, why is Doug teaching us the history of search patterns? And all become obvious, as I keep promising. But EDR is the expected detection range, and it is established by David watching a horseshoe, and when he can see the horseshoe 50% of the time, we've got EDR. And we've measured it in seconds. You could measure it in distance, but we measured it in seconds. And EDR is something I think your powerboat students can get their head around, because they can throw a horseshoe in the water and drive away from it and count to 15 or whatever number. So that's the first bit of terminology. The modern term that you will find in most books, and this is what's used in IAM SAR, so it's what's filtered down through search and rescue internationally, and it's master mariners are taught it and so on and so forth, is track spacing. The track spacing and EDR are very, very similar things. In fact, track spacing is 2 EDR. So track spacing is double what EDR is. However, track spacing is not derived from throwing a horseshoe in the water and watching it and counting. Track spacing is derived from a table, or these days from a computer. So this is one that I think someone without access to those tables and computers could calculate themselves. This is one that you would need the computer, the software, or the table to get. Sweep width. What's sweep width? Well, sweep width and track spacing are basically the same thing in terms of distance, and let's have a quick look at what they actually mean. So the search that's going on here is a parallel search. We're going to talk about that in about 10 minutes, but just to explain, the search vessel has gone along this line here. He's gone off screen and done a U-turn. He's currently making his way down here, and he will presently do another U-turn and off this way. So we haven't looked at a parallel search, but that's what's going on. And the sweep width is the area they consider to be searched. So that distance there from the search vessel to here, that is what I've called EDR, isn't it? It's the range we expect to detect it from being at. And the RNLI and all these other authorities call that sweep width. It's basically 2 EDR, isn't it? Track spacing is the distance between the different legs of a parallel search. And you'll notice that track spacing is the same as sweep width. So sweep width is the distance you can see doubled. Track spacing is the distance between the two tracks. It is exactly the same number. It's impossible for it to be 2 different numbers. It has to be the same number. It's just being used slightly different. And you see how it relates to EDR. That is 2 EDR. So where do we get track spacing from, or sweep width? Well, this table is one I've unashamedly pinched from the RNLI. So this is in one of their training manuals. And they might go looking for a human, so a person in the water. They might go looking for a life raft, a small vessel, a large vessel. So they've got lots of stats. For the moment, we're only interested in the top row and down here. We're only interested in the person. And it's based on conditions. So they've pre-worked out, and this is all done on averages with a bit of safety margin. They've pre-worked out that in winds of less than 16 knots, sea state of less than 0.6 meters, if your boat can do 20 knots, your sweep width is 30 seconds, which interestingly would have been Davis 15 seconds, wouldn't it, if he was looking at EDR. And they've given us some bigger conditions and some different boat speeds. And down here, they've said, if you can't do 20 knots, you're going to do 10 knots. Here's some more figures. So not only is this something the RNLI have access to, but this is pre-programmed into their software. So the Coast Guard says to them, I want you to do a particular sort of search from position wherever. They use positions A, B, C, D, we'll come to that. Their software essentially has all this in it. So although sweep width and track width, although sweep width is derived from a table, these days it's derived from a computer. So what other terminology have we got? We've then got the search radius, and we've got leg length. And these are all similar terms. So let's get another picture up. So this is just something we've already seen. So that is leg length there, isn't it? Oh, apologies again. Silent. So leg length is from the point you turn onto a leg to the point you leave it. So that's leg length there, isn't it? So when you come down this leg here, that is one leg, and that is a second leg, although you don't change direction. And in my example, leg length is 3 times EDR. The search radius is leg length plus EDR. So if a casualty was here, theoretically we should see that corner, shouldn't we? Because we can see, well, let's come down this leg here. So we can see that area there, can't we? So the search radius is 3 EDR to make the leg length plus another EDR of visibility. So this example, search radius is 4 EDR. Now, if you are a member of one of the lifeboat services, you may be hearing some things I've said and think that's a little bit different from what you've been taught. What they are, and I tend to work off, is track spacing. So they tend to go 1 track space, so only 2/3 of what I'm suggesting, but they, in certain instances, an on-scene commander decides to go 2 track space. So you can see where what I'm suggesting we're teaching our powerboaters diverges very slightly from what people in a more professional, I use the word professional, in a more search and rescue orientated situation would use. And those guys all speak the same language. They'll use the term track spacing, and the Coast Guard allocates some search areas. So, you know, what do I say? George and Mildred have lost a crew member overboard. They think they know roughly where it is. They've called it in a mayday. Lifeboat comes out. Coast Guard tasks them with going to a specific place, performing a specific search pattern, and he tells them, this is your track spacing, use 1 track space or 2 track space. That's a little bit different from avoiding the delay and George and Mildred getting on with some kind of search in the meantime. So that's why I see the 2 differences. Okay, so before we discuss how we might teach that, any questions or anything so far?
Doug, if you're involved with a search with the professionals, presumably there will be a cross type of searching. So they may do a sector search whilst they task you to do a box search or something like that, and they use different vessels to do different searches. Correct.
Now, let's just explain the reality here is the Coast Guard doesn't like to use us a lot. We're considered, I know you all go to sea profession, but we're considered leisure boaters, aren't we? They don't like to use us a lot for what they see as fairly skilled stuff because they don't know what they're dealing with. They don't know how much practice we've got. So you've all heard the Coast Guard saying all vessels in the vicinity of St. Catherine's Point, you know, if you can keep an eye out for a suspected man overboard. What they don't like doing is tasking people to do specific tasks if they don't know how good we are. So when they throw lots of assets at a scene, they may have a helicopter, even 2, and they'll put those on searches that are quite far apart, so they don't crash into each other, and they'll have 1, 2, 3 lifeboats. They may have the access to some merchant vessels, and they know these guys have got particular software on board, and they know these guys have got particular training on board. So they give them very precise searches. So to me, our powerboat customers, if they could call the Coast Guard and say, I've been conducting a sector search, this is where my datum started, this is my EDR length, the Coast Guard can replicate that on his computer, but he will, when he's got enough assets, go and revisit that because he doesn't quite know the abilities of the people he's talking to. People do sometimes get hung up with, what if I'm asked to help with a search? the Coast Guard will throw his best assets at the places of the most likelihood. So what happens is, they start off with, whether it's a life raft or a person, whatever, they start off with, here's the start point. And then they go, what time was the person we think there? And they put a time in, and the computer very quickly generates a pattern that's color based, and the brighter the color, the more probability it's there. And he then throws his best assets, in particular aircraft, at the areas of most probability. So if there was, and obviously as time progresses, the area of probability expands, and a person in the water will float depending on their mass, weight, what they're wearing, etc. So as time progresses, if he's got lots of assets, and us as leisure boaters, and that's the term for us, were to offer our assistance, we'd be put in the area of least likelihood, where we had least chance of crashing into another asset. But I go back to my opinion, and this is not written down, because my opinion is, what I'm teaching my students is, when they lose someone, how do they react until on-scene command and search and rescue take over with possibly more effective techniques. Any other questions at all?
Not actually a question, but if you saw Saving Lives at Sea last week, there was probably a good example when they were looking for a kite surfing kit, and they worked in conjunction with a helicopter to do this sort of search. Yeah, sorry, Ray, I didn't hear. Who was that? On Saving Lives at Sea, I think it was last week, the RNLI programme. Yeah, I mean, yeah, great. I mean, the Coast Guard will use whatever asset they can get, but they're always going to favour the assets they know the most about. Okay, so now we're going to talk, I haven't got lots of slides for this, but now we're going to talk about how we might teach this practically. And it sounds like Gary has been teaching this practically quite a few times. So let's ask Gary, how do you go about setting up the exercise?
Well, I've only ever done it as a box search, and I actually use an orange to do the search with, but I always conduct it at 10 second stages and 10 knots, because I find that's the easiest for people to concentrate. It's too much for them to take in, and to be fair, I've never thought about EDRs in the past, and I just run a box search, and 8 times out of 10 it's successful, and on the times it's not successful and we lose the orange, it's a good learning point for the students that actually it's pretty damned hard to find things. Okay, brilliant. So I can see a lot of sense in keeping the numbers easy, and I can see Gary's approach of let's teach the expanding square or expanding box because it's the easiest to get your head around. Let's have a quick look what clue we get from the R-way as to what we might do. Well, Doug, what I would say is, having listened to what you've just said, I'm relatively tempted to start delving more into the sector searches. But that's, okay. Well, if you give me 2 minutes, I'll tell you how I run it, and then you can take that away and use it, or you can throw it in the bin. So we don't like Doug's idea, but I'll tell you how I run it in just a second. Just before we do that, I don't like slides with lots of words, but this is a screenshot straight out of G19, the instructor handbook for powerboat instructors. And what does it tell us? It says the most effective pattern for a lone craft is an expanding box. Blah, 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 blah. It then says the sector search has been shown to be more accurate. That's a slight contradiction, isn't it? I think that what they're saying here is, look, the sector search is more accurate. That's the one that's better. But for a lone craft who's not been practicing loss, the expanding box is probably easier to get their head around, which is exactly what Gary suggested, and I would agree with. When these first came into the syllabus, we were asked to teach both. In fact, it was then called an expanding box. And then a little while later, this one disappeared, and we were asked to teach that one, and then it seems to have reappeared. There isn't anything hard and fast, so you're going to get now my take on how to do this. So first of all, I'm not nice as Gary. I have a grey tennis ball, so it's a little bit harder than orange to find. The difficult thing about a grey tennis ball is you can't buy them anymore. You have to give it to your dog and let your dog go and play with it and chew it and get it muddy for a little while and then rescue it before it gets popped. I can't find a shop that sells anything other than a luminous yellow tennis balls. But anyway, I've got my grey tennis ball, and
in the classroom, I give the students a brief, and it's shorter than the brief you guys have had. And I ask a few questions in the usual teaching format. So we just kind of drum in what the corners are and so on. I then brief them for a second practical session. And the other practical session usually is something high speed navigation. It might be following a contour at high speed, following some transit, something like that. I tend to do this on the second day of an advanced powerboat course. I put a dam buoy on board because the rivers I'm teaching on don't tend to carry a dam buoy, so I add that piece of kit. And we go out into whatever stretch of water I'm going to use. So for those who have the local geography I do of Southampton, you can do this in Southampton water, but not on a flat, calm day. On a flat, calm day, you need to get out into the central Solent and get a tiny bit of sea state, even if it's only from passing vessels. I'll then go out into the area, and I do this search first. And I, in my head, have a picture of the chart, as I'm sure you all do, and I just drop that onto my chart with a very rough estimate in my head of what all the legs are going to be. And it's only very approximate. And I then say to myself, I want them to do that triangle, and that third triangle, and I want them to find my grey tennis ball down here. I don't want to drag this out all day, but also don't want to find it straight away. So I'll ask one of the students, I'll find a nice wiggly contour in the chart that goes like this, and I'll ask him to follow that at 15 knots or something. And then I'll say to the next student, right, you jump on the helm and see that transit to drive towards the transit. And the students will be thinking, this is a bit basic. What I'm actually doing is getting them to drive around a circle, and at some point I throw the tennis ball over. And I've told you where I throw it over. So if any of you ever come on a course with me, you know what's going to happen. I throw the tennis ball over here, and a little while later, as we're about here, all in my head, I say, stop the boat. We've lost Mr. Tennis Ball. And it dawns upon them, oh yeah, we were told earlier how we were going to do this. And they go, well, we've got a dam buoy. And sometimes you've got to prompt them, sometimes they get on with it, but they chuck the dam buoy in and they start the search pattern. So the things that make life easy for you, the first is, don't be shy to have a quick few glances at the magnetic compass and make sure that where you lob this in is roughly where you want to end up. And one way of making it very easy for yourself is you find a mark, I don't know, let's take a mark, Hillhead, and you just say to yourself, I'm going to use Hillhead as a start point. The students don't know that, but it just gives you, the instructor, visual reference, because then you can work out when you're in the right place in relation to Hillhead, chuck your tennis ball over, set them a few things to do so they drive around for a bit, and then just say to them, go that way, and as they pass it, go, oh, we've lost. And they won't even acknowledge that Hillhead is your reference, but you've used it. The other thing you can do to make your life easy, of course, is when you chuck your tennis ball over, make sure you get a transit or two. If the tide's going eastwards, then get an east-west transit. But if you can get two, it just means that after a little while progresses, if it's not quite working, you can see which way to steer it to make it work. So we go out and we perform this. And if we get around that third triangle and we haven't found the tennis ball, I start to question myself, and my heart rate goes up a little bit. Like, oh, is this going to work? And we go around and do the second circuit, and invariably it does work. If, however, it hasn't, it's probably because I've estimated EDR wrong, and my tennis ball's actually outside of my circuit. So I'm going to move on to the expanding square. Now, here's the facts for you. I would estimate I've run this session a lot of times, 60, 70, 80 times. And it's varied a little bit over the years. And in all the times we've done it, we've only ever once lost, well, it wasn't a tennis ball actually, but we only ever once lost the item. And I used to be working at a centre in Southampton, and it was a dinghy centre. And I hadn't lost the tennis ball at sea, I'd lost it ashore. So I was looking around the workshop to find something that floated. And I cast my eye on this bag of ducks that they used to use with the Optimus sailors, the floating ducks that the kids had to go and chase. So I picked up this yellow duck. I thought, that's too easy. So I got my black insulating tape and wrapped it up in black tape. So we now had we nicknamed it Ninja Duck. So we now had a black plastic duck. And it's quite a small one. It's not the big bath one. It's a little small one. And we went out, and it was a bit of a last minute, couldn't find the tennis ball, used this. And we chucked it in, and we did the search as I've described, and we found it. And I got back to the workshop, put the duck on the side, and went around the next course 6-7 weeks later, used the duck again, and so on and so forth. And I'd been using the duck for a year or so, and we ran a search in Southampton Water, and we lost it. And it was a fairly benign day, and the students were doing quite a good job, and I was pretty gutted because, one, I told them this always works, and two, it didn't work, and three, they'd done a really good job and it didn't work. So that was the day that my statistic went from this always works to it hasn't worked today, and I apologise to students, and off we went. Now we're going to fast forward 10 years. A decade later, I was running an advanced powerboat instructor course. There's 6 guys on the course. There's a father and son team, and I'm describing to them exactly what I've just described to you, and they start grinning and nudging each other. One of them says, "You better tell him." And it turns out that 10 years previously, the son, who was back then 12 or 13, and his dad had been out doing a dinghy race off Netley, and they'd seen this duck floating past and they'd picked it up. And when he told me, I remembered that there'd been a dinghy race out in the middle of our search area and we'd had to slow down a bit for it. So I'm going to put that down to I hadn't actually lost my duck or tennis ball ever. So the summary from that is it works, but you've got to manage it well. Another couple of tips for you. When we get to the tennis ball, I tell them to treat it as a man overboard. And when we go back to pick up the dam buoy, I tell them to treat that as a man overboard. So if we go out and do perhaps 2 sector searches and explore, sometimes we do 2 searches, but if we go out and do 2 searches, we've just done 4 man overboard pickup practices while we're at it. And it's all just reinforcing the same stuff they do back home. So every advanced powerboat course I've ever taught, which is quite a few, I have always done these searches. And I guess the reason for that is when I did my advanced powerboat course, that's what my instructor did. So I've just kind of modelled on that. My own course plan, it fits into day 2 quite nicely, and I combine it with some other stuff. So we go out and do a few high-speed stuff. Perhaps if someone's night nav didn't go well the day before, we might go out and look for a cross on the chart or something just to reinforce what they need to pick up from the day before. And I quite often do it as the second half of the Sunday. It's almost the last thing we do, because if they've had a lot of number crunching and navigation and tidal heights and stuff, it's a bit of a refreshing just driving fast, and it's quite satisfying to find it. Okay, so that's my take on what we would be doing and how we might go about it. And I fully appreciate that the syllabus doesn't say we've got to do it practically. And in fact, this paragraph here gives us a little bit of wiggle room as to where to go. But certainly if you were working at a centre I was running, I would be encouraging you to teach both and to do it practically. But that's not to say that those that don't are doing it wrong, because the advanced syllabus is a full syllabus, I get that. And there's a lot of time to spend on stuff. My take on this, and this is me speaking, not the RWA, is that if I'm devoting half my advanced course to teaching man overboard and boat handling, I'm not doing good service for the students that are running with good skills already. They want to learn something new. And that stuff is in the syllabus, but I like to give that a very brief look on the advanced. You know, if they come on an advanced and they're struggling with turning their confined space, they're possibly on the wrong course. So I like to get this in there because it's something new they haven't covered elsewhere. Somebody earlier on mentioned the safety boat course. The safety boat course is a very full course. I would suggest that this would be a theory session on the safety boat course rather than a session.
Matt here. I can't find it on the safety boat course, and I stand to be corrected, but I don't think it's there anymore.
Oh, that's interesting. So let's.
Definitely used to be there.
It's been a while since I've taught safety. Right, so I'm going to open the instructor handbook and I'm going to share that with you so we can all look at the same place, and then we all leave with the correct answer. So share screen. This is the RWA book app. Give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Thank you. I suspect half of you have got this, and the other half, my advice would be to get it.
The reason I mentioned safety boat was because it was taught on my course, but that was quite a few years ago.
It definitely was in there as a theory element, but let's have a look and see if it's gone. Or They do sometimes make little small tweaks, don't they? And you'd sometimes, unless you're constantly referring back to the book, don't notice them. Lost it. Where's?
Along the top.
No, I'm after the logbook because that's the definite syllabus. That's the one. Who would have thought of putting the powerboat scheme logbook in the powerboat section? So, in fact, we could probably do a search of pattern. That might be quicker. There we go. Matt is correct. It is not mentioned in the safety rate anymore. That's interesting. Okay, so it definitely was in the safety rate course as a theory, but it's obviously been reviewed and slid it out because it's probably not considered that appropriate when dinghy, I'm guessing now, when dinghy and windsurf centres are only operating within 3 miles of their start point. Okay, so we'll go back to the presentation. Thank you, Matt. Right, so now, how are we doing for time? Has there got a clock on for me?
11 o'clock, Doug.
Okay, thank you. Right, so what we've got now, we're going to come back to search patterns in 5 or 6 minutes, and we're going to look at some other search patterns just to up your knowledge level, really. But before we do that, I just found this on YouTube the day before yesterday, and I thought it was quite interesting. So it's a J97, so that's a 10-meter racing yacht called Windjammer. Some of you may know the crew on board this, may know the boat. This video was made in January 2019. What happens is one of the crew falls overboard and they recover her, reasonably successfully, actually. So this session is not intended to rip apart the owner and the crew of Windjammer, because they successfully got their crew person back fairly quickly. But I think it's probably quite useful for us to discuss what did they do well and what might they have done differently or better, which is my polite way of saying what was bad. So I'm going to divide you into 4 groups now. So this is a sail yacht, and some of you aren't sailors. So I'd like the sailors to look at the sail-specific stuff, and I'd like the powerboaters to look at the stuff which is generic across all boats. So, for example, having a spotter pointing at a man overboard is generic to all boats, isn't it? The technique you use for dropping a sail is specific to sail. So if we said Pete Smith and David Walder, Simon, Paul Pearson, could you look, please, at what they do well as sailors, and then, and there's that one. Sail, and then so not Paul. Take Paul out of that group, and then if Paul, Ross Butler, Ray Mitchell, another Paul, if you could think about, if that was your student, what would you like them to do differently? What might they do? What might they do better from a sailing point of view? And then I've missed out Nikki, Gary, Matt. If you could have a think about, please, as a boater, what did they do good? What did you like? If you're giving them feedback, what would you compliment them on? And then that leaves Alex, Chris, and Nick. If you could have a think about, as a boater, what they might have done better. If you miss which group you're in, don't stress too much. It's just let's see if we can get a few comments from us all afterwards. So I'll shut up and put the video on now.
Well, we'll just trim on first, we'll go upwind, then we'll tack, okay? I'll do that and do the tack, and then you take over, okay? So get ready to trim up. Are you ready to go? Then we're just going to trim up. I'm going to try to off it. Okay, tell me when you're ready. Okay, coming up. Straight into attack. Going to go into attack. Yeah, I want to go to it. Ready for time? Okay, 3, 2, 1, and go. Okay, stand down. Okay, somebody point at the bottom of the board. Okay, stand down. Stand down. Easy leg. Okay, get the chip on the deck. Get the chip on the deck. Okay, let's get the train down as soon as we can. Train down. Okay, I'm going to go back around. Can we get the train down, guys? Get some surcharge on the lane. Surcharge on now. Take your eyes off it, right? Now get this on the mayday, please. We need to call the mayday, okay? We need to call the mayday, guys. Get on the radio. Forward. I'm going to go the other way. Call the mayday, please. Now get ready to recover here. Try to come to windward, get down onto it, okay? Okay, guys?
Okay, so the man overboard pickups obviously happened. I'll just advance so you can see what happens afterwards. Helicopters arrive. And communication with the lifeboat. Crew get back ashore and have a bit of a laugh and joke about it. So, so that video is on YouTube. That's where I found it. I don't know the people involved, but yeah, any of you could download the same video, and there's a little write-up there. But let's hear if we got any comments there. So let's talk first of all to the sailors. So don't pinch the boating stuff, sailing specific stuff. Anyone from that first group of what did you like? What did they do good?
The skipper seemed to have good leadership.
Yeah, lots of communication, wasn't there? Lots of talking with him. Good. Anything else?
He seemed to be sailing away for a long time, and you could have just hove to, stop the boat, drop the jib on the foredeck.
So let's just, your bottom line, let's just stick with the positive stuff. What do we like?
They got back to the casualty relatively quickly.
They did indeed. Was there anything we liked about from a sailing specific point of view?
Depowering the jib quite early meant that the boat slowed down considerably quite early on as well. I know we talked about hove to, but actually just depowering and getting that jib down lost boat speed and therefore distance quite quickly.
Good. So you minimised the distance they were blasting away at 6 knots. For the rest of the sailors among you, was there anything you would like to do different? If that was your student, you might debrief and do differently.
There were a couple of things. I understand that depowering the jib will slow the boat down, but I think, you know, there should have been a crash tack, because you're increasing the distance all the time between the mob and you. And a crash tack, one, it stops the boat, and two, it's pointing back the right way. The other two things I noted on that.
David, we'll just come back to you. Just don't grab them all in case someone else has got some.
Okay.
Second. But yeah, I think there was a few nods there about the words crash tack and hove to. Any other thoughts from the sailors?
Yeah, I mean, just sorry, one comment on that. I mean, you know, whilst that was one of the first things that struck me, they did have one guy on the foredeck at the time. As a racing crew, he'd have probably dealt with it if they'd have thrown attacking quickly, but they would have had to make sure he was safe, because if he would end up on the wrong side of the headsail, on which would now be the low side, that could have potentially been a second casualty. Yeah, that was just an observation on the crash tack on that. Maybe in hindsight, it was better to just drop it as they did.
Do you think they needed to drop the main? Could they just have got rid of the jib and kept the main up and then use the bow down approach? Because that would have made the side of the boat lower and made it easier to get the person on, possibly.
I think that's a fair comment. I mean, they dropped the main and it worked, didn't it? But there's so many things that can go wrong during a mainsail drop. I would have been inclined myself to leave the main up and either get blown down sideways like we do on a motor cruise, or come from a close reach downwind. I'd have been inclined to leave that main up. But to be fair, it worked, didn't it? Any other comments from any of the sailors before we move on to the more generic, non-sailing specific stuff?
I think there's a huge potential for ropes in the water and getting around the prop.
Yeah, yeah, and in fact, keeping the mainsail up's one less thing to worry about there, isn't it? Get those 2 jib sheets in. Interestingly, you may not have realised this. The engine was on before the exercise started, so he'd gone out for a training session, and in his own words, I kept the engine on just in case, and that was proved to be a good strategy. Let's throw discussion to our petrol and diesel head friends. Any comments on? Well, let's first of all, what was good? What do we like?
I thought the skipper was very calm, and the spotting was spot on. They were on it straight away. I thought they did a really good job with that. Just generally, it was quite well managed, I think. Other than the Mayday was considerably late. Other than that, I thought it was a good job.
Mayday went out at 1 minute and 30, so 90 seconds after.
Yeah, so to agree with Gary, I'd have probably raised Mayday a bit earlier, had someone on that almost straight away. So it's out there, and potentially people are coming to help you.
Yeah, I think that's a good comment. Anything else from anyone else?
I think that. Sorry.
No, you go.
Yeah, I think the late Mayday, I think they got all hands to trying to deal with the sails. If they'd stopped the boat, they would have had time to Mayday, then deal with the sails. I appreciate the position of the crew on the bow. As a cruising sailor, not a racing sailor, that hadn't drifted into my mind, but they'd have had a bit more time to settle down and get their heads around what they were going to do next if they'd hove to. But all the crew were handling sails in some way, shape or form.
So could they have spared a crewman to go and put a Mayday out sooner or not is really what we're asking. And it may be he didn't think of the Mayday straight away and it came to him, a minute later. But I would agree with the comment that could have happened earlier, and a hove to would have helped that, wouldn't it? Any other comments from the non-sail specific stuff?
Yeah, the comment I was going to make was that it would have been quite quick to be able to push the mob button, because that looks like a Ray Marine bit of kit on his bulkhead, and got that, and along with that, to throw in the Dan Boy.
Yeah, that was definitely missing.
I mean, I'm surprised that the spotter didn't lose sight of it, because of they'd gone for about 2 minutes before they decided to turn. Doing 6 knots, you do the sums on that in terms of how far away they were, and it was blowing about a force 5, so someone's going to be difficult to see.
Yeah, I agree. I think to me that's a non-negotiable. That's not a discussion. That is you should have thrown some man overboard gear after that person to make them more visible, give them something to float from. So that would be on my cross list. Definitely something to pick up on. Any other comments from that fourth group? I don't think we heard much from yet, have we? Which was Alex, Chris, Nick, and Matt.
I think the method of recovery was a little bit dubious. I'd have brought them to the lower side. I think obviously if we were talking about drifting down and using the sail, we would have had to lower that side, but I'd have brought them back to the cockpit to recover rather than trying to bring them up on the bow.
I would agree with that. That pickup on the bow is so much more difficult because of the height.
I think to be fair, I think they were midships, weren't they? Of course, the danger on the very bow or the stern is that the boat gets picked up on a wave and slammed on their head. Somewhere in that shroud's midship section, the boat can't get picked up because it doesn't have it boils down to a keel. It doesn't have something to smack you. So I'm not going to say I disagree, but I think the point of pickup, from my point of view, I wouldn't pick up on that one. I quite like that.
Maybe it was a camera angle. It did look quite a long way from, but
maybe a little bit further back. Yeah, maybe a little bit further back.
Also, looking at the wind direction and the way the waves were kind of breaking, it looked to me like it was a downwind pickup.
So he set the boat up upwind. So you may have heard him say, "I'm going to come to windward." And he had the boat blowing sideways down towards the casualty. I think that was my interpretation. So not something we normally do, not something I've seen many yacht masters and instructor candidates do on a sailboat, but it worked, didn't it?
I mean, he got the man back or the lady back.
Yeah.
And you could say reasonable treatment of the casualty afterwards, really.
Got
them down below.
I mean, I've watched the video 4 times now. I'll just give you a few comments I came up with. The crew are evidently all youngsters that have come out of the dinghy world, and they're hotshot dinghy sailors, and they're great crew on a race boat because you can throw anything at them and they put up with it. It'd be nice if we could throw in some life jackets at them. There's a lot of buoyancy aids there to get out in January in 35, and I know it's 35 to 40 knots because that was in his report. 35 to 40 knots of breeze and a buoyancy aid. You probably saw when that girl was recovered, she wasn't fully conscious. She wasn't able to look after herself. They were dragging her around the boat. In actual fact, they dragged her buoyancy aid off her, just trying to pull her around the boat. So fair play to them for being alongside in just under 4 minutes and having her on board in just over another minute. But I think that, to me, was a good example of where they should have been wearing decent life jackets. And clothing in general. All the crew, apart from one, looked to me like they were wearing trainers. And there's one there in a picture. And I know it looks quite a sunny day, but it's 35 to 40 knots in January. I think the skipper should be providing life jackets as part of the boat and recommending the crew wear some wellies or something better. Did anyone notice what happened to the jib when it was being dropped?
Yeah, it went over the side.
See if we can get a picture of it. Yeah. So what happened here was the second they started dropping the jib, it popped out the tough luff. Apologies to the powerboaters, that doesn't make any sense, but there's a groove up here, the jib is hoisted up, and if they're abused over time, the groove opens up, and if you take the head sail, the halyard tension off, it pops out. Interestingly, that was a known fault, so they went out that day knowing that was a fault, and it didn't cause them a massive problem, but you could just imagine engines running, person in the water, someone's already mentioned it, you can just imagine how easy we end up with a bit of sail or halyard around the prop. So that would be, to me, a clue to get that repaired before you. If something's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong in cold weather and windy conditions, isn't it?
If they hove to, it probably wouldn't have happened.
I would agree with that. Yeah, the hove to might have solved that. Interesting, in his comments, he also said that he kept the engine running not just in case, but also because it wasn't that in that good working order. I'm not quite sure what that means. I don't know if that means he wasn't sure if he switched off, it would start it again, but something else just to keep an eye on. One of the clips I noticed near the beginning, I can find it. I don't want to dwell too much on this because it's a little bit off topic from search patterns. I think the guardrails looked a bit loose to me when I saw it in. You'll have to take my word for it. The guardrails did look a bit loose. Good. Okay. So I was actually looking for a video on search patterns and I couldn't find one. I found that, so I thought I'd show you that instead. But let's get back to our core subject, shall we? So we've looked at 2 datum searches, and datum searches have a reference point, a single start point, which is what we talked about, whether it's a digital datum or a visual datum, and the pros and cons of each, and that for that sector search, even if you start with a digital datum, you put a visual datum in to start your search from. We're now going to look at area searches, and for the vast majority of you, I'd suggest you're not going to teach these because these are tricks that are used by search and rescue authorities, such as the RNLI, where they search a specific area. So the Coast Guard is tasked, I want you to look between A, B, C, and D. The datum searches we've looked at already, for those, you work off magnetic compass because you and the datum and the man are all moving in the water together. An area search, we work over course over the ground. So there's a big difference there. The datum searches that I'd suggest you teach, the 2 we've looked at, are speed through the water and magnetic compass. Area searches are speed over the ground and course over the ground. So these can be drawn very much over a chart, and as time progresses, wouldn't move an area. So there's a number of area searches, and the most common are known as parallel sweeps, and there's 2 sorts of parallel sweep. On the left, we've got the creeping line ahead. On the right, we've got the parallel track. So what's relevant? So Coast Guard has allocated a search area, and that is A, B, C, D. There may be another craft who's got A, B, C, D right next to you, but that's your area. CSP, this is the start point, so commence search point, and The difference between the parallel track and the creeping line ahead is very subtle. The parallel track does the long edge first. The creeping line does the short edge first. Other than that, they're the same. He's gone down. So let's put some terminology on it now. So that distance there is half a track space, isn't it? So he's gone down here, and when he's approaching the line BC, half a track space before he's turned. He's gone one track space and turned. And then if you look at line AD, half a track space before that he's turned. Half a track space, of course, is what I call EDR in my world of not having a computer. But if you were on an all-weather lifeboat, this is programmed into their navigation gear. So the Coast Guard says A, B, C, D, and this is your track space, and the computer draws that out over the plotter, and then they follow it with no allowance for wind or tide. They follow over the seabed, if that makes sense. So those are parallel sweeps. I did used to, a long time ago, talk about this one here on the Advanced Powerboat course, but I binned it quite some time ago because it was just too much it became too big a session to deal with. Next one we're going to look at is the Goalkeeper. So this is a perfect example of an area search, because the guy's fallen off the bridge here. Well, there's the current. So we know he's not up tide of the bridge, don't we? So that's fairly obvious. And we know he's not, we think he's not on the land. So you've got a very defined area. And in actual fact, the land has defined the area for us. So he's dropped off there. They've worked out sometime in the next 15, 20 minutes, he's going to go past this point. And all the Goalkeeper does is dive back and forth. So let's show you that. Here's the area, blue dotted line. So it's literally defending the goal. And if this was a big goal, you might have someone defending that bit and someone else defending that bit. It would depend on what EDR or what track space is, wouldn't it? Next one we're going to talk about is the Shoreline Search. So imagine this is the search craft, and it's going to keep itself equal distance from the shore. So, and you could have a succession. You could have another boat out here a further distance off. So let's say this is a small craft. The Coast Guard has asked you to search half a mile offshore. If you're, say it says there's cliffs, if you're fitted with radar, this will be very easy to use the radar to keep that distance. But if not, you'd use some of the navigation tricks. And you're following the coastline, aren't you, essentially? And as I say, there may be another boat further off. And this distance would be determined by EDR, wouldn't it, or by track space, by the distance you could see. It may be there's a team actually working on the shoreline itself. So it may be they visually see the first bit and you see the second bit and the bit after. And as I said, if there's another vessel, it could be going up here. So that's a shoreline search, typically used when someone's disappeared from a beach, a surf or something like that. This is the track line. There are two sorts of track line. There's the non-return, and you can probably guess the one's called the return, or the single leg, the double leg, twin leg. So when would this get used? So imagine there's no tide whatsoever, there's no current, and the ferry has gone from B to A. And when the ferry gets to A and they go to disembark all the passengers, someone hasn't come back down to his car. So they go, oh dear, we've got a passenger unaccounted for, we've lost a passenger on the way. Well, they know that, assuming the passenger's not hidden himself in injury or something, they know the passenger's fallen off on that route. So a track line search just simply goes back down that route. So we know where the casualties come off has been, we're going to go back down the same route. So that's a single leg track line. This is a track line return. So that's the route we think the casualty is most likely on, but we accept he's going to drift it off one side or other. So we're actually going to offset slightly. So this is track space here, isn't it? So EDR in Doug's world, track space in the RNLI's world. And we just offset cleverly onto land. We just offset slightly and come down one side of the, and then the other. If a search and rescue asset was deployed to do that, he would report back into command at that stage and say, I've done that, what do you want me to do next? And he might get allocated something new, or he might be said, okay, there is a little bit of current, let's go and do a Goalkeeper down here. We may be asked to repeat that, or they may have said, well, maybe he didn't fall overboard, we don't know. And then the last search I'm going to mention, so these are all quite quick, because as I say, I don't think you're teaching these are more just for your awareness. This one I call the Quadrant Search, and it is in fact a bit like a creeping line ahead. It's sometimes known as an oil rig search because that's where it's used. So I'd like you to not have wind and tide, just picture one or other. So let's say there's some tide. Chap's fallen off the rig. Obviously, we need to make sure he's not clinging onto something down here. Well, we know he's not gone up tide, so you very quickly draw these 4 quadrants. So tide's going that way. That gives me 2. Those are the 2 lines important, and I'm just going to come down tide, going from side to side as I go. So a number of years ago, I did a bit of work with a wind farm up on the East Coast, and this was exactly what we trained their guys to do. So they'd drop a man onto a wind turbine, and they'd go off to another wind tower and they'd drop off 6 guys. And if they felt someone had fallen off a wind turbine, they would draw this out on their chart, and we used to identify transit. So they'd pick the tide there only went 2 directions, obviously up and down the coast. So you'd look up here and you go, that's my wind turbine in question. There's my transit. So that gives you that line. So as you're coming down, you've got something to hit. And it might be we sit over here and we look at that one and we could see a transit on the shore. And we just used rough transits, whatever was closest. That particular wind farm was close enough to the shore we could pick up transits. That was also 20 years ago. I would say the technology in chart plotters now, you could quite easily have the technology to do this for you rather than have to worry about transits. So that, I think, pretty much wraps up what I'd like to cover. So before I come back to you for a quick quiz, any questions at all?
Yeah, Doug, could you go back to the slide of the creeping line search and the parallel search? Because I might be missing something here, but it looks to me that if you turn the creeping line search through 90 degrees, it's doing the same thing as the parallel.
You're exactly right.
Orientation.
Basically the same search. The difference is the parallel track takes the long edge, AB first. The creeping line takes the short edge, AD first. And
right. Okay, that's pennies dropped now. Thank you.
No, that's a really good question, actually. Well spotted. Let's just identify why they might use one or other. So there's 2 reasons. The first is if there's more likelihood of the casualty being in this area, there's no point wasting a lot of time going up and down here, is there? So the Coast Guard looks at the highest probability of where the casualty is and deploys the asset to that bit first. So that might dictate. So although you've been given A, B, C, D, they think that AD is the most likely end. So let's do that first. Okay, he's not there. Let's go and do the rest. The other reason is conditions. We all know that it's quite easy to keep your course when you're going downwind, don't we? Forget sailing here, just under power. It's also fairly easy to keep a course going upwind. It's hardest when you're going across the wind. So if, let's say, we had a southerly wind and they set you off on this one, you're spending a lot of time trying to combat leeway. Well, it could be tide, couldn't it? A lot of time. So they might set you off on this one because you spend more time going into and downwind and less time crosswind. So there's 2 different reasons why they might jump from one to the other. But I should emphasize, if you were involved in this stuff, the Coast Guard is coordinating, or, unless it's a long way offshore, but even then probably the Coast Guard's coordinating. So HM Coast Guard's coordinating. They're dictating where A, B, C and D are. They're telling you what search to do, and they're telling you what the track space is. So you almost go into robot mode. And this is where, I'm not sure about the inshore lifeboats, but certainly the all-weather lifeboats, I think probably inshore lifeboats as well, the Atlantics, have got this software in them. So the information is sent to them and it tells them where to search.
Yeah, they've all the boats are now equipped with sims, so all are capable of doing this.
Was that Simon, was it?
It was.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Great. Any other questions at all?
I'd just take it from that, the fact that the one's rectangular, one's square. Is that just a visual representation? Because I had the same question about the long and the short bit. So it's just meant to be 2 rectangles.
Yeah, I'm not going to blame the author because I've pinched the diagram from someone else, so I can't slag them. But yeah, if you could imagine AB is longer, so they're both rectangles. The point is, this one uses the long edge. It doesn't demonstrate very well in the picture. This one uses the short edge first.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I might see if I can do some jiggy poke with that before the next one and make that one a bit longer. Cool.
I think referring to them as the long leg search and the short leg search kind of defines it.
David, if I was in charge of naming, that's what they'd be. Yes. Right. Okay. What we're going to do now is get a bit of interaction. So let me stop sharing that with you and start sharing this with you. So we're going to do something called Kahoot. I'm sure some of you will have played this before. How does it work? You're going to need your smartphone. So first of all, if you're already using a smartphone, I apologize, you're going to have to do this a little bit differently. But for those of you that have got device number 1, which you've got me on at the moment, and you've got a smartphone as well, I'll explain what we're going to do. So pick up your smartphone and go to kahoot.it. So that's that address there. So don't Google it. I'll give you a different address. Kahoot.it. If you don't have a smartphone, you can just do this on a piece of paper. When you've gone to that address, there's your PIN number.
Hang on, I'm in trouble here. God's sake.
I should excuse myself 1 second while you guys are logging in. Right, so we've got Nick, we've got Gary, we've got Pete. 3 out of 15, we've got Nikki.
Sorry, I've got to do it on paper. My smartphone's got an issue.
Okay, one smartphone. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, what am I doing?
Quick thumbs up if you've used Kahoot before.
No.
Awesome, Virgin Kahooters. That's 10 of you logged in. If we've got any more logging in, we'll wait if you're still logging in. Just shout.
Yeah, try. Sorry, Doug.
I said no rush. I just didn't if we didn't need to.
So I don't understand. My phone's not playing the game. It's probably me. User error, I should think.
Okay, so Paul, you need to go to kahoot.it. So don't Google it. You'll get a different address.
Yeah, I've got kahoot.it.
And then it should ask you for your game pin.
I'm just getting a blank screen. It's my phone's a bit funny. I've just had it.
Grab yourself a pen and paper.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
So what will happen is the guys who are logged in on their phones will see their scores. We're only going to look at the top ones. We're not going to embarrass anyone if they become last. No one will know. But if you haven't got access to a smartphone, you can still write on a piece of paper. So what happens?
I signed on as Gary Martin anyway, so if I come last, it'll.
Okay. If you so what happens is the question comes up on the screen. So if the question said, "What did Doug have for breakfast?" It'll give you 4 options. A might be blue eggs. B might be green cereal. C might be red toast, and D might be yellow. All of the above. And you go, yeah, Doug's a fat git. He had all the above. It's D. You answer. So you read the question on my screen, and you hit the answer on your screen. And your screen haven't the answers yet. There's no question. And it's fastest fingers on the buzzers. So you get points for getting it right. You get more points for getting it right quicker. So let's crack on. So first question. Which factor most differentiates a datum search from an area search? Seconds left. Good. So a datum search, that's the first two we looked at. That's the sector search and the expanding square. Uses a magnetic compass, so well done to those that got blue. The area searches are the ones that use these GPS-derived or land-based, seabed-based factors. So, Tenny, you got it right. That means someone was listening. And oh, look at David, early lead. Peter only 2 points behind. Well done, Gary, Mac, and Paul, and well done everyone else who's only just behind that. On to question number 2. So we get the answer to the idea how it works now. EDR is and 10 right again. EDR stands for expected detection range. But I just want to emphasize, don't go away here from saying Doug says the R way says you've got to teach this. This is how Doug works it. There are other bodies using other terms, aren't there? On to, so well done, Gary, taking that lead. Dave is only just behind. Mac, Alex, and Paul, well done. Arrow up means you're moving up the rankings, a bit like Top of the Pops. Question number 3, on a sector search, leg length is what a split of answers. So I would suggest that we use EDR to determine our leg length, and I'm marking, and I would suggest that we use 3 EDR, don't we? So 3 times EDR makes the leg length, which would make, because I'm marking, none of the above the right answer. However, if you were trained by one of the lifeboat organisations, you would be very forgiven for saying track space, because that's probably what you would have been taught. Sweep width, of course, is the same as track space, but that's not where we derive from. So they've all got a bit of rightness to them, but I'm going for none of the above, the green one. So that's, we order the table slightly. On to question number 4. 50-50 on this one. And it would appear that 8 of you are either lucky or were listening. The advanced COC syllabus specifically mentions the sector search. It doesn't mention the expanding square. Sorry, it looks like 5 of you were lucky. Apologies. How can you have so many unlucky people? So Nikki's moved up, Paul's moved up, Mac's still holding top spot. Only 4 questions left. Search patterns are contained in the advanced power syllabus as good. Well done to the 8 of you. It was an understands. And to be honest with you, the advanced powerboat course is really the place that we're teaching this stuff, and that's the place where I think there's time to do it practically. There's nothing wrong with covering it with Yacht Masters and other courses, but it's not specifically in their syllabus. Right, well done, Mac. Nikki, you're going to have to go quite fast to catch up with him and grab that first place, and you 3 are going to have to go quite fast to move up as well. On to question number 6. Which volume of IAM SAR manual details international search pattern protocols? It is, of course, volume 3. A question I have been asked previously is how to pronounce this, and it is literally IAM SAR. IAM Search and Rescue is the pronunciation. Well, Nikki's dropped. Still on table 8. Well done, Mac. Mac is actually doing very well. So come on, guys. Let's see if we can speed up the answering. Third last question. All terms on a sector search are there are, of course, 120 degrees to starboard on the sector search. We're gonna assume you guys just pressed the wrong button. You did know that, really. The expanding square would be 90 degrees, wouldn't it? And the sector search second round would be 30 degrees off, but the turns are 120 to starboard. And Mac is clearly ahead now, and Pete's quite a long way into second place as well. Second last question. A dam buoy horseshoe drogue is required to... So the drogue is there to stop the drift caused by wind, isn't it? We want the whole thing to move with the tide or current, don't we? Because that's what your man's going to be doing, but we don't want it blown across the surface because a human being isn't. And small little change there. On to, I think we're on the last question. On to the last question, question 9. Select the correct order. What a horrible question, eh? Who wrote that? So we went out of time for a couple of there. Of course, this is the sector search, isn't it? So we locate the datum, we head north to establish EDR, we then treble EDR. So that one took a bit of reading. So well done for those 6. And on to the final results. On the podium, 3rd place. Well played, Alex. Well played, Pete. And that means, not surprisingly, Matt is in first. Well done. So as I said, we're not going to worry about who came 4th or 5th or anywhere else. We're not here to do any assessment. So that pretty much wraps up my session for you guys, which is good because I've got someone arriving at the door by the sounds of it. So before we wrap up, any questions at all? Anything we've talked about? Or any thoughts of something you think I should do differently or cover for this afternoon's group?
I thought it was really good, Doug. Thank you very much. There's got a lot from that, mate. I wasn't expecting so much, to be honest. So thank you very much.
That's nice feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Doug, for taking time out of your day to prepare it as well. It's great. Thank you very much.
Well, Nikki, I think
likewise. Thank you, Doug. Let's hope it never happens, but if it does, thanks very much for your input.
I think the thanks really needs to go to Steve, Nikki's other half, who dreamt this up, and Nikki and Steve, who've done all the admin to put it together. All I've done is log in for 2 hours and talk, and I quite like talking. So thanks to Nikki and Steve for really. It's quite boring collecting and collating addresses and grouping people and moving people who've changed their mind, isn't it? So thank you to them. Guys, I'm going to just stay online for a minute or two in case anyone's got any questions for me not relating to what we've talked about. But other than that, let's say goodbye. And I look forward to seeing you all either at next year's conference for a beer or on the water before then. Obviously, this year's conference is not going to be face-to-face, is it?
Thank you very much, Doug.
Thank you very much, Doug.
That was brilliant. Thank you.
Very good.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks very much, Doug. That was really, really interesting. Thank you.
Cheers, thank you.